Okay, welcome everybody we're starting the recording now. Hi.
Hi.
So this is our XR US, XR America topic, Restorative Empathy Circle. So we're going to talk about the conflict that's going on in XR America and XR US. And we have 4 participants, and maybe we can just start with introducing ourselves. I'm Edwin Rutch from the XR Empathy Circle Work Group, and I'm here in the San Francisco Bay Area, and also part of XR San Francisco. And Will, do you want to just give a quick intro? You're muted. You're still muted, Will.
Oh,
there you go.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm with XR Portland, I guess, and so Portland, Oregon, US, and kind of an action rebel. I have to go out there, do actions. Also organizing with the school. They have a little school affinity group at Portland State, so that's fun.
Oh, great, thanks. Callista?
Hi, yeah, I'm Callista. I recently joined XRSF, but I'm currently in SoCal right now. And I've never done an empathy circle, but I'm super excited. About it.
Oh, great. Kara? You're muted.
Hi. I'm Kara. I am an activist, sort of independent at the moment, but I was working with XR US, XR San Francisco Bay Area very closely. I started this SF Bay Area chapter last year, and so I was patient zero on the ground there, and I don't know actually very much about XR America, so if I could just clarify if I understand. So Callista, you're with XRSF?
Yeah,
I haven't met you yet. Hi.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Cool. I love to meet like people that are in the chapter now that I didn't like, because it's grown so much since I've last checked in.
Well, let me sort of frame what we're doing here, since you just joined short, last
Thank you
minute
so
too.
much.
So yeah, so I'll give an overview. So this is the beginning of a series of empathy circles on the conflict between XR US and XR America. And it's just a space to dialogue about the issues. And right now, it's whoever shows up sort of takes part. So it's ideally we would have a couple participants from each side. And we've done one empathy circle so far, and it was more, XR America oriented participants, because nobody kind of else showed up from XR US. So we do want, both parties to take part, and I hope that over time we'll be able to get, 2 parties, but it is sort of an ongoing rolling empathy circle and discussion. So it's not an official mediation,
Sure,
with
sure.
with official participants from each side. It's just like, hey, this is like a dialogue that's sort of happening, and let's just have it whoever shows up, and ideally if we can get parties from each side to show up, that would be great. And our intention is to create a restorative or really a regenerative culture of empathy, and that's to create a sense of mutual listening, understanding, care, and trust, and constructive relationship going forward. And we use the process of empathic listening to do that. So it's a structured dialogue process that we've used a lot through XR. So the process, to explain it, is there's one person who's going to be a speaker, and they select who they want to speak to. So you can select whoever you would like to speak to, and we can talk about the topic of this conflict or whatever else is alive for you, whatever's up for you. And you share, an idea or two, and then you want to pause to let the listener reflect back their understanding of what you're saying. And you want to be heard to your understanding and make sure that they have understood you to your satisfaction. And then you sort of check, did they understand it? And if they didn't, you can say it again, maybe in other words, and then you get a reflection. And then once they get it, then you can continue, add another idea, another few concepts, or, share a bit more, and then pause, and then they'll reflect back. And we have 5-minute turns, and I'll be the timekeeper. And when the time is up, I just, hold up 5 minutes, and you sort of want to wrap up at that point, get your final reflection. And then it's the listener's turn to become the speaker, and they select who they want to speak to, and they speak and do the same process. And we just go around like that for the time allotted, maybe an hour and a half or so. So that's pretty much it. And the best way is just to sort of jump in, and I can model it. So if someone wants to start, I've got the stopwatch here. You can speak to me and I'll model the empathic listening. So just to kind of start the process, so whoever wants to jump in, and I'll just mention that you just want to reflect back what you're hearing, not add your own ideas, ask questions, but you can interrupt just to ask the person to pause so you can reflect back what it is that you're hearing, because if they're going on and on speaking, it gets kind of hard to be able to reflect back what you're hearing. So hope that's clear, but it'll kind of reveal itself in the process. So Will, I'm hearing that you want to start, and I'm going to listen. I'm listening.
I'm prepared to start.
Could I just ask one quick clarifying question then? Did I understand that there are not participants today who are identified with XR America?
No, I think Will is sort of moderate here.
Yeah, I guess that maybe that's what I'll talk about for my 5 minutes.
Oh, okay. Yes.
But yeah,
thank you.
Okay.
Sure. I guess you could call me more in the XR America side, just because circumstances worked out that way, not because I chose one side or the other.
Okay, well, let me reflect back. So I'm hearing that you're sort of on the XR America side. It's not that you chose that side, but that's just sort of how things kind of happened or developed.
Sure. Yeah. So I think XR US has a very strong presence here in Portland. However, the XR America group has been really welcoming and trying to help me get slides to set up presentations with my club on campus. And so XR America has been really helpful for me.
Okay, so I'm hearing that there is a big XR US community there in Portland, and that you've found that XR America has been very supportive and helpful for you starting to get at a club, trying to get something going with slides and other material.
Yeah, so there's this, we got this basic talk, the Heading for Extinction talk. And so I wanted to kind of give this talk, and XR America was kind of pulling me in. I guess they noticed that I was organizing already with XR US a lot. And so they're kind of recruited me and gave me slides, but not XR America slides. This was before XR America was started.
So you've been an organizer, and they just sort of saw that you're an organizer and then said, hey, would you like to take part with us? Is that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So my feeling as far as the XR America, XR US thing goes is I think this is a really good opportunity for us to create coordinating groups, sort of, and utilize the coordinating group structure to basically create big events where XR US and XR America can, pool their resources.
So you'd really like to see that XR US and XR America get together and pool their resources and sort of coordinate and have maybe even some coordinating groups. And did you mean that you think empathy circles is a way to make that happen? I wasn't quite clear on that.
No, I think this is a good opportunity to talk about the coordinating group structure and how it can be used to make XR US and XR America work together for bigger events.
Okay, so in here right now, you'd like to talk about how they could work together to coordinate. So that's sort of a topic you'd like to talk about here.
Yeah, so basically I think the way the coordinating group is supposed to work is for bigger projects, smaller groups can send representatives to the coordinating group, and then they can coordinate. So ideally, most protests that are citywide or statewide or nationwide would have this capacity to coordinate.
So you would like the smaller groups to get together, XR America, XR US, and others to coordinate actions together, and basically, and just that's sort of the structure that's happening anyway. Kind of groups get together and have some kind of a coordinating structure.
Yeah, I mean, I think most people that are in XR America or in XR US wouldn't have a fundamental problem with any of the differences. I think the most important thing is to get out in the street, I think.
So the difference is this conflict is not really that big of a deal, and the average person would just want to get together and just work together.
Yeah. Am I in 5 minutes yet?
You have 1 minute left. You can say, I feel fully heard. That means you're done. Then it would become my turn, or you can finish your time.
Yeah, I feel fully heard.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Then I'll speak to Callista. So you're muted. And I'll just start the time. Yeah, I'm really glad you were so enthusiastic about taking part in this. You know, just mentioning, he said, oh yeah. When I talked about it in the XR at the last meeting at San Francisco, XR, the dog, they call it dog, that I kind of presented some of the ideas about you know, empathy, empathic direct action. Everybody was stony faced, and you were very open and excited about it. So I really appreciated that.
Great. I'm hearing that you really felt heard by me in our meeting. Appreciate that.
Very much so. However, I did mention it to one of the people that you were taking part. I just said, oh, yeah, I'm trying to get people together. And I said, but you're taking part. And he got very angry. He said, oh, you're taking advantage of her because she doesn't know much. You're taking advantage of her openness. And I thought, I don't know, that just seemed like a strange criticism.
How did you feel about it?
No, if you just reflect back what you're hearing.
Oh, yeah. So you're hearing that, yeah, I kind of was put down, cast aside by an older member of the group about your meeting.
Yeah, or that you were taking part because they felt that you were a new member and didn't maybe understand the dynamics of what was going on. So maybe that was one of their criticisms.
Yeah. It sounds like, yeah, they think maybe I don't know the XR US, XR America topic enough to kind of be part of that. That makes sense.
Yeah, and so for me though, it said whoever wants to take part can take part. So I don't have any, you know, for me it wasn't an issue, but I kind of got flack for it, and so I was just, it was like. Oh,
so you were, yeah, you were kind of getting like put on the spot for something that, you know, you were just trying to share the wealth and spread kind of just empathy circles in general.
Yeah, and I might give context. I don't know if anyone knows, but we do a whole series of these cafes every week on the XR values. And there's 20 groups, you know, internationally supporting who are co-hosting that. So all of these groups are supporting empathy circles, or what we call empathy cafes, which are, you know, larger cafes of 30, 40 people talking about the XR values.
So you guys do this often. You do a bunch of big empathy circles with a lot of people fairly regularly.
Yeah, and yeah, so I'm really glad you're here. I'm glad you're open, you know, interested in empathy. I really, you know, appreciate that. I'm so glad everybody's here. You know, I'm glad we're just having this discussion.
Really hearing your appreciation for our participation today. Thank you.
Yeah, and so I feel fully heard. So now it's your turn to select who you would like.
Awesome. I'll have Cara listen to me, and I'll go. Yeah, so kind of going off of what Edwin said, I really don't know the XR US versus XR America issue too well. I literally just joined XR US a couple weeks ago, and I'm still kind of getting initiated.
So I hear that you're brand new to XRUS and XRSF, and you're just beginning to become familiar with the processes.
Yeah, so I don't know much about the differences between XR US and XR America. I've already seen that some people have very strong feelings one way or the other, which is not knowing anything. I'm just kind of watching from the outside a little bit.
So you're getting kind of a bird's eye view without a lot of context, it sounds like, to some conflict that is clearly sparking some very strong opinions in the chapter.
Yeah, so I kind of am inclined to go with what Will said, which is that I think people do inherently just want to work together, and they're just choosing whichever outlet is going to make that happen the easiest. But I'd love to resolve those conflicts so we could all kind of unite, or at least just be allies together instead of fighting each other.
Yeah, so I'm hearing a strong sense of a desire to help unify the chapter, bring people together, support the notion that that ultimately we all just want to take action. And it sounds like you have a real an interest in being a positive influence on that.
Yeah, I feel fully heard. Thank you.
Awesome.
So now you choose whoever you want to speak to.
I have to think about it for a second. Yeah, I want to speak to Will. I feel like it's sort of a little bit of a non sequitur, but I'm just going to start by talking about what I went through this weekend. I went out and protested on Saturday night. I'm going to get pretty emotional, so I don't normally cry in front of people, so it's going to be a little bit of a challenge for me.
So you went out on Saturday night to the protest, and
yeah.
It was a very emotional experience.
Yeah, and the thing I wanted to talk to you about, which was how different that experience was on Saturday night from my entire experience last year. That I felt like all last year we had a lot of organization, and we had a lot of tactics around coping with police. But we also had to try to get arrested, and we never had cops show up in armor. When I was arrested, I was on the roof of Wells Fargo. I climbed a fire escape in full public view onto the roof of the bank, and the cops didn't even touch me. They were really nice about it, honestly. They even gave me my poster back. Like, my experience last year was nothing like my experience on Saturday.
So last year you had a lot of protests and actions you were doing, and he felt like it was very well organized. He felt like the tactics were working. And then this year on Saturday, you felt like the tactics weren't as good, and the police response was also disappointing, and that the vibe has changed.
It was kind of. That sort of sounds like where this is going. So that's cool. I feel almost heard, but the next part I think will help qualify, which was when I went out this time, the difference were that the majority of people protesting were Black and brown, and there were also a lot of white allies, but the issue was a Black issue. The issue is about race and inequality. And the cops were violent, and they were not concerned with anyone's safety. They were hurting us with tear gas. They were exposing children. The same children they told us they were present to protect last year, all year. You know, in our marches with the youth, that they said their whole point of being there was to protect our free speech. Those kids, they were throwing tear gas at those children, same children, at night under the cover of darkness. They were using flash bombs, which, if you understand anything about crowd control, is the worst way to avoid injury when you have a lot of people, because a loud noise causes frenzy, causes a stampede, causes people to run out of into traffic. This wasn't about safety. It was really, really different. And I think this, I knew this. I'm gonna, I guess, stop there for a minute because I'm saying a lot.
So during this particular protest, it was really probably a race issue, because you feel like it was a race issue because you feel like the police were more militant and more aggressive because of the color of their skin. And they were, not only that, but they were they didn't see them as children or people, and they were just firing tear gas and flashbangs into the crowd. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. I think that this difference, like, I knew about this before, right? And when I started the chapter, and the first thing that XRUS did with us and that we did as a chapter was to adopt the fourth demand. That when we did this, it was because of global pressure at first. And that was the first time a lot of us had, who were new to activism, and white people who were just coming into trying to work on anti-racism within themselves, to understand what it means to ask someone who's Black or brown to get arrested for the environment. And I had an academic understanding of this, and I even had a really, like, a personal understanding. I went to the Frontline Oil and Gas Conference, and I met with people. I went in a vigil there, and there were some locals, white locals, who drove by that vigil by Indigenous people for murdered and missing women, and they fired their hands, boom, 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 at us as they drove by. I saw all of this, but it wasn't until this weekend, because it was so personal, and it was the same. Those are the same streets I occupy. When I occupy them, I have them. They're mine. When a brown girl occupies those streets, she could die. And that's why I think this is fundamentally why it's very important that we understand this issue is also very important. And it's not about one group, like, let's be friends with the other group and then we can just pool resources and have differences. Because these differences are, like, mortal for people.
Okay, so when you started out with XR, there was a pressure, possibly internationally or nationally, to add a fourth demand to address race issues. And you feel like this was a good thing because it allowed you to, or this was good because of what the Black and brown experience is when protesting, and that we should address this. And therefore, that's it. This is as far as I got.
It's okay.
So I think, and then you said something about it. We're not going to be able to cooperate unless unless that we recognize the fourth demand or something like that. Is that right?
I guess I kind of meant like it's not an issue we can just like smooth over and have our differences about. Like it's one that has to be talked through, and because, well, that's like, that might be the next.
Yeah, we'll keep it for the next round. It'll go around several times. So yeah.
So thank you.
So I keep the time too.
Oh, okay. So no, I guess I'll talk to Edwin. I think that.
Okay, listening.
So I've heard this sentiment before that Kara is saying. I guess, and the sentiment is basically, recognize the fourth demand, and talk through it or work through it, etc. Or else, right? It seems like there's almost a real cutoff here.
So you've heard sort of an attitude of it's the fourth demand or else, sort of, and it's sort of a firm cutoff.
Right. I personally, I loved the fourth demand, or I loved it for a while myself. When we first started, or when I went to my first XR protest back in June of 2019, they did a land acknowledgement beforehand, and that was very powerful. And reading the fourth demand was also very powerful for me at the time. You want to go ahead?
Yeah, so you found that when you first started with XR, the land acknowledgements as well as the reading of the fourth demand, that you found it very powerful and were very supportive of it.
Right. However, it kind of became distracting when it kind of, the fourth demand itself began to take over very small meetings that, we couldn't do much other than just organize, a half dozen or 2 dozen people into the street. And it became distracting to have the fourth demand constantly brought up.
So you found over time that it became distracting when the fourth demand kept being brought up, that it was sort of distracting from the main focus, or that you wanted to focus on?
Yeah, so I think the issue is, like, so the essential issue for that particular part was that we wanted to apply the fourth demand to each other, and to, you have to think a certain way, or you have to, say a certain thing. And it started to not become about, the government, and it started becoming about, who's got the right amount of wokeness, and who could, put up with the greatest amount of grief, it seemed like.
So it seemed like the sort of the energy around the fourth demand became like who was the most woke and who could put up with the most grief, which I guess
Right.
you were going through, maybe.
Yeah, I was called out on many occasions to elevate my wokeness, if you will. I felt like I was rising, but eventually it became so burdensome that I voluntarily left the group.
Mm-hmm. So the call for you to raise your level of wokeness kind of became like a burden, and sounds like you just decided to leave the group there.
Yeah, I was going every week. I was there, for, I don't know, 4 months, every week, every Tuesday. And it was just, I felt like every time the same topic would come up, and, who's woke, and specifically is Will woke. And that was, I felt like the fourth demand is, though important and it was on the flyers, it's not something we need to be constantly applying to to me specifically or anybody in the group.
So you found it was sort of almost like a litmus test. Everybody was saying, or have you sort of reached the right level of wokeness, and it was kind of being applied to you, and if you were like woke enough.
Right. Anyway, so that's why I kind of that's my like, you know, my like, okay, you know, that's like my line there. It's like, okay, that's one area we'll go to. If somebody wants to talk about the fourth demand and everything, that's fine, but I don't necessarily feel like we need to challenge each other. I don't feel like that's useful at all.
So there's kind of an aspect of challenging each other that you experience that you don't think is useful. I mean, it's good. You'd be okay with the demand, but just kind of challenging each other about it is, you don't really support that or like that.
Right.
That was the 5 minutes too.
Okay. Yes, our fight sounded a little bit, but I felt like I had to say something.
No, you feel heard?
Yeah, I feel heard.
Okay, so guess I'll speak to Kira. Hit the start the timer here. I got started with XR through XR UK. Actually, I kind of connected with the Future Democracy Hub, and through a friend to one of the co-founders of XR. And I shared what we were doing with the empathy work and the empathy circles, and they were very supportive. It's like, oh yeah, this is great. This works with Future Democracy. It's like a first step towards people's assemblies. And I started working with that group, and it was just loved it. Just having a great time, very open, very accepting. Yeah.
So you started off your work with XR through the UK group and through the international branch, and they were talking to you. They were very excited about the application of empathy tents to how we were forming the people's assemblies, the citizens' assemblies, as they go forward.
Yeah, and so the fourth demand for me, I have a similar feeling. It doesn't sit well with me in the sense, and actually I probably not the best person to talk about it. In the last circle, Parker, he was like eloquent in terms of his reasoning around the fourth demand. So I don't know if I'm the best person to speak about it. So pause there.
Yeah, so you're feeling somewhat on shaky ground about talking about the fourth demand, but you have some concerns and some discomfort with it.
Yeah, and it's that for me that I love the demands, the three demands, and that it takes the demand that it's a citizens' assembly, which is, it's like we take sortition, we bring random people together to make a democratic decision. And it's up to those people to decide what they want, what they hear the experts, they hear the arguments, they talk with each other, they kind of work through the problem, and it's sort of their space to democratically, work through the issue. And I think that's great, because I really support that.
So you were feeling strong in the three demands, and particularly the notion of the citizens' assembly, where creating space for people to contribute and come up with solutions together through a kind of flexible structure.
Yeah, and that the fourth demand brings in sort of politically, I would say politically leftist sort of ideology, which I think kind of moves the whole. I'm very much into empathy. It's like, let's bring everybody together. We can talk with everybody. I don't know if you've probably seen the empathy tent, since I don't know if you've seen it in Berkeley. We've had the political left, the political right in the tent. So I'm really about bringing everyone together from all the spectrum. And it does feel to me that the fourth demand kind of moves into like a politically left sort of demand. So I have concerns about that it's not like open and sort of inviting for everyone.
Right. So what I'm hearing from you is that that the three demands have a kind of more universally applicable structure, and it can be open to like people from different parts of the political spectrum. And whereas you're feeling that the fourth demand is bringing in something from the left political spectrum and a very specific thing that then impacts and influences how everything else is able to function, and
Yeah.
who everything is able to appeal to.
It takes it out from everyone dialoguing together, that we already have sort of pre-existing sort of premises, I guess, you know, of what we're going to do. Whereas with this People's Assembly, it's whoever comes to the group, and it's a wide variety of citizens, so they will come and represent their points of view.
Right. So like what you're kind of thinking, what I'm hearing from you is that in a sense, the third demand for you would enfold and encapsulate everything that the fourth demand declares that it should, as a structure, allow for those perspectives to emerge.
Right. And for me, it is immensely important that every voice get heard. I mean, across the full spectrum. And I think that is the way forward, is for every, you know, voice definitely to be heard. And that's what I'm all about with the empathy, is that everyone deserves, you know, to be heard and empathized with in a mutual way.
So of what I'm hearing is that of primary importance to you is that like that this message be universal, that absolutely everybody is able to say how they feel, much like the way an Empathy Cafe works. And that everybody be heard, so that no voice is excluded or anyone feels that their opinion can't be heard in that space.
I feel very well heard. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay. Let's see. I think I will talk to Callista. So I guess I think it's sort of related to like what Edwin was just saying, but there was an XR like forum discussion that was held with a guy named Ian from Berkeley and another fellow from the XR London and Roger, and I thought it was quite good and really good actually. And in it, what this guy Ian talked about was that they're actually, like, if you look at the divisions in XR and XR US and XR America, they're the divisions in the American left, and that you have what you have really are the, if you look at, like, let's say there are two very divergent groups. So one is like the race left, which says, you know, race is critically important. An anti-racist reading and understanding and working on anti-racism and like focusing our efforts and understanding the role that racism has played in all of this stuff that's happening right now is like hypercritical. And you're either, and like that might make some white people uncomfortable, and like that's, you know, so be it, but we have to like work through this because it's like super critically important. And then there's another part of the left that says, you know, yes, we understand, like we totally agree and understand the importance of race. Like, I don't think there's anybody on the left that's saying like, no, your problems don't matter, right? But this side of the left is saying race divides us, and race is like the thing that's been used to divide us. It's divisive, it's political, it divides us into camps, it makes it hard for us to talk to each other. And so when we absent race from the dialogue and allow, then we allow people to talk to each other. And so we don't want these divisive issues, so we want to just focus on, you know, this or that or the other thing. And those two groups, obviously, yes.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is that you really liked this one talk that you were hearing about the XR US and XR America divide and just the political right and left in general, and how the left is split between two camps, one that really values the importance of the dialogue about race in their discussion, and one that wants to supersede that in order to have a more unified and less discourse like kind of presence.
Right. I feel very heard. What I thought was really interesting about this that Ian said was that it seems as though these two groups are like totally incompatible and we can't marry these things. Ultimately, I agree, like I think race is critically important in any analysis of America, right? As American activists, I think we personally think that's really important. But what he said was like, there's one more element of this that actually brings us all together, which is that yes, race, his analysis of race was largely about like, for the first half of his study, it was about like whiteness and white culture. And then he later has reformulated his opinion to think about race as a weapon of the ownership class, as an exploitative tool, as something that is profited from. And that if we look at who profits from race, we can actually begin to understand and deconstruct like how it's affected and been weaponized and impacted all of us. And we can find the commonality between us. Now, all of that is to say, this is like super heavy, big thing, right? But that's is really actually what's, I think, underlying this disagreement. It's not like, do we have 3 demands? Do we have 4 demands? Is this a practical issue? Is this not a practical issue? It's like, it's been played out in that framework.
So what I'm hearing is that you feel that race is essential to American history and that it should be part maybe of this discussion, but the discussion isn't as simple as a 4th Amendment or not a 4th Amendment, but it really contains the entire underlying racial discussion in America that is so hard and so complex to talk about, that is very hard to talk about, but that it maybe is why it's so underlying and not just about the 3rd Amendment and the 4th Amendment.
Awesome. Yeah, I feel heard. How am I on time?
All right. Is that it? Oh, okay. And then I would love to talk to Will. Hey. So I've just been gathering what the whole thing is here, but I kind of wanted to talk instead about why I joined XR. I first joined on my college campus when they had the talk, the Heading for Extinction talk at my school at University of San Francisco. And I was so excited about it, and I was really here for all of their principles. And I was really especially excited because it was led by 2 Indigenous women and a Latino man. And everyone was talking about Indigenous rights. And that was the thing that kind of drew me first towards XR.
So you got into XR at a talk at your school, and it was given by 3 people of color. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah. And what I was just really drawn to about the talk was that it was Indigenous led, because I really, after being at my school for a long time, it's a very diverse place with a lot of different types of people. You kind of realize as a white person, or I've realized as a white person, that people of color's voices are often put aside for their white allies to speak over them. And so I've realized myself that their voices need to be uplifted and at the forefront of movements. Otherwise, it's very easy for white allies such as myself to talk over them and kind of silence their voices and their concerns.
So specifically what inspired you was the Indigenous people, because you feel like they really have not been given a voice in these movements, and that they had a voice and they were, working in this program was very inspiring. That's what it sounds like.
Yeah. And so that was the first thing that led me to XR. And then seeing the fourth principle was something that I personally like hinged my entire like connecting with this group on. Like I was like, wow, a group that incorporates maybe the racial justice of a movement like Black Lives Matter that I like maybe could have joined instead, or at like a different, like when I was just searching groups that I wanted to take part in, I was really excited that this group encompassed like reparations for people of color, particularly Indigenous peoples and Black people here in America. Because growing up in America, that has clearly been a very huge problem for its entire existence.
Specifically, you were excited about certain aspects of the fourth demand, namely the reparations and just the overall amount of work that went into creating this fourth demand. You felt like it was highly representative of your beliefs.
Yeah, because as a young person myself, like I'm still in school, I got into activism because I felt really hopeless about the way that this country was headed and is heading and has been heading for so long. And I've kind of found the only way to kind of alleviate that pain is through activism, and through knowing that I can build a better future. So it's been really important to me to make sure that that future is the one that I want to see, and that I carefully chose a group that represented the future that I wanted to see in America. And that group, and that future is one where people of color are leading at the forefront, and also, finally getting to have their voices heard, and not having white people maybe tell them what they need, but listening and finding out what they do need, and finding out what they want after so many years of not having those opinions or voices heard in any sort of fair way.
So you're talking about your aspirations as an activist. You feel like the best in activism that's going to happen is going to be led by and for Indigenous people and people of color, because of what has taken place and the long history of them being pushed to the margins.
Exactly. And so although I know that's a very like ideal, youthful, like I am just looking, that's my perfect future. I also, even though that is my kind of ideal future, I'm also really interested in working with people who have very different views than I do, because I think we all want the same thing, but I think people have different imaginations based on their backgrounds of what that future might look like.
So you think that although this is so very important to you, you also realize that you might have to work with people who may not feel that way. They may not feel exactly as you do, but it's still important to you. Did I get everything?
Yeah, I feel it.
I will choose Kara. There you go. So, I think, I guess we're talking about our own experiences a little bit. So I'm going to talk about my experience a little bit. I was a computer science major until this year, until 2020. The last 2 quarters in school, I stopped taking computer science courses and I started taking political science, social science, different stuff. It's a late change for me. I'm 40 years old. You want to repeat that?
Yeah. So you're in school. You're studying. You were up until now studying computer science, and then you recently made a rather large shift into political science, which is late for you. You're 40, but you're still, and you're getting continuing your education.
Yeah. So basically, relatively new to a lot of these perspectives that we're diving into, such as Gandhi, political activism. You know, I'm obviously focusing heavily on things that I feel relate to XR, right? And what I'm finding is the more I'm learning, the more I think that it's possible that the fourth demand that XR America is advocating for may actually be superior to the previous XR US model. And this is just based on the ideas of climate and ecological justice.
Okay, so I'm hearing that you're new to these ideas, but you're also beginning to gain a sense of where you think XR fits into this picture, and that there's a XR America Fourth Demand, which I actually don't know about, that you feel is perhaps actually the language of this demand is targeting the purpose or the mission of what we're trying to go for better than the XR US one formulated last year.
Yeah, so I think the major crux of the matter is what was added to the third demand in the UK. And so from what I understand, this little part, it's basically what it says is we're going to create a citizens assembly specifically on climate and ecological justice. So this is not just a citizens assembly. This is a citizens assembly that's going to be created, bringing in experts, you know, advocates, people who are trained and possibly indigenous, possibly, you know, but basically they're going to be teaching the citizens assembly about the ideas of climate and ecological justice.
Okay, so what I think I understand is that there's language that has been added onto the third demand that clarifies that the citizens assembly is around climate and ecological justice, and that you think that gets at the point of what the fourth demand might be attempting to get to.
That's correct. So there's different types of climate and ecological justice. We have global justice, like those of us in the global north versus those of people in the global south. You know, us in the global north driving around in our cars, people in the global south, like places like the Maldives, losing their habitat, you know, really feeling the brunt of climate change. And then there's kind of a local justice, something I would call local justice. And local justice is like, you know, toxic waste being dumped in your backyard, right? Which is disproportionately felt by, you know, people of color, right?
So there's climate justice, you're talking about like bigger issues, and then there are like local issues, and that there are like different levels of engagement, and that you're seeing that some of these issues that are broader are, in your view, more universal, whereas other issues that are like more local, maybe the ones that are more impacting certain communities.
Right. So I think the basic formula of Extinction Rebellion is that you can create this citizen assembly anywhere, right? You can create it in a city, you can create it in a state, you can create it nationally. And what's beautiful about the three demand model and kind of the fourth demand model is that you can really apply climate and ecological justice on a city, state, or national level, and you don't have to worry about words like reparations possibly confusing them, the citizens assembly. They can make policy decisions, you know, based on whatever policy proposals they want to make, and they can decide for themselves if it's if it makes sense globally or locally, or if it doesn't make sense for either.
Right. So there's like your take is similar to Edwin's insofar as there's a flexibility that the People's Assembly, the Citizens Assembly, which can then deal with any range of issues, can incorporate perspectives of people from any range of backgrounds, and can then settle issues and decide whether something is of local relevance or of broader global relevance, and so on, without introducing language that you find divisive or perhaps divisive, such as reparations.
Thank you. I feel heard.
Cool. I have to think about what I was going to think about. I'm going to talk to Edwin.
Listening.
When I first joined Extinction Rebellion and started the chapter here, I was hearing like what was happening in the UK, which was like there was some critique occurring, and that was that that there were a whole lot of brand new activists, is a lot of energy, but that people of color's voices were not necessarily being heard, and that that Extinction Rebellion's understanding of race, class, and privilege was unclear. That we had no real statement on that, aside from the fact that those least responsible seem to suffer the most. It was also unclear whether Extinction Rebellion thought that the ecological renewal effort should be, colonial led. It wasn't actually clear, right? Because you were looking at London, you were looking at a bunch of white people. What they were saying was we're the most responsible, so we should lead the world in like doing the right thing. And I think what those people probably meant was like, we should sacrifice the most, like we should have to like pay the most for this problem we created. But it's still pretty unclear whether that means like you think that Britain should lead the way and save the African nations from, no, right?
So let me see if I get this. So when you were creating XR here, you looked and saw what the UK was doing, and you weren't really sure what their position was on race, and so it sounds like you have some questions about sort of their take on it, and if they're trying to be, they're saying, oh, we kind of created this, we got to take this mess, we got to take the leadership on it, and you're feeling maybe that has sort of a colonial attitude to it, but it sounds like a little unsure. You're kind of thinking about it.
The thing was that it wasn't me. I wasn't even thinking about this. I was thinking, let's get in the streets and save the world, right? Other people were thinking about it, and so it was a context that I entered into where this critique was being leveled from other activists, from other parts of the world, from journalists, from so at that point, XR US, was going to emerge, meaning that some chapters were starting to exist. There was no like central XR US's kind. My chapter started around the same time that XR US was getting started. It all started with B, and I'm not sure who else she was working with at the time. I was actually contacted by them at some point to bring us in as a chapter to XR US. But I think that as they were forming, as I was forming, I was approached by like the same people they were. I can pause a minute.
Okay, so you weren't even sort of thinking about those things, but there were other people thinking about it, and that you and the XR US were sort of starting around the same time, and it sounds like that group came and talked to you about these issues. You hadn't really been thinking about it. It was more like, let's get out to the streets and go. Whereas kind of where you were.
Right. I was, I just sort of was going with the package as is, and I was already of the opinion, that like keeping things simple to as many few universal demands was like the way to go, and let's not introduce controversy, and that's not what happened. And I met Penny Opal Plant, who is an indigenous leader of the INM, I Don't Know More women's resistance movement, and she co-wrote the demand. She was one of the indigenous leaders to co-write the fourth demand. To be honest, there wasn't a lot of dialogue around it. We didn't discuss it amongst the chapters. The language wasn't really discussed, but that's where it came from. And it was yeah, go ahead.
Oh, so you're just trying to explain how it kind of came about, and it was that I guess Penny had kind of wrote it up and presented it, and so there was really not a lot of dialogue about how this how to start this.
What I understood was that there was
too, but if you want to finish that thought.
Just quickly, that we were being approached by representatives of activist communities of color who were saying to us, we don't know what your stance is. We don't understand where XR stands. And as XR opens in America, like where race is really important, we need to know where you stand. And we think you need a demand that's gonna say that, so that we can go to our people and tell them we know where you stand, and they can believe us and also come along on this message.
Okay, so you're wanting to explain how this demand came about, and it was sounds like an indigenous group that came up with this, that we need to be clear on this issue of race and where XR stands on this. And it was sort of from that angle where the fourth demand came from. And so just trying to create some clarity maybe about how it came about. Yeah,
I know I have 5 minutes, but just to say, like, this was largely like an important consideration for like, what do we do in America? Like as we launch this in America, can we not talk about race? And the answer was no, we have to. And I think there was universal agreement amongst the chapters that were involved in those calls on that. There wasn't per se much chance of dialogue to change the language in the demand.
Okay, so it was that there was that this is America, you have to talk about race. It's so important here that this needs to be part of addressed with XR, and there was not a lot of dialogue about that, but it would seem to be really important because of the context of the United States, what's going on here.
Right. Yep.
Okay, great. Will, can I speak to you? Yeah, I guess the thing that comes up for me is this aspect that you felt sort of pushed out of XR, or just you kind of felt judged, within XR. So I just wanted to sort of address that, because I think that's important. That it's great to incorporate, indigenous, Black Lives Matter, or whatever, the spectrum. But it's also important to include everybody. I think that's yeah. And what I'm hearing from you is you didn't feel welcome.
Yeah, so what you're gravitating towards, as far as I'm concerned, is basically that you see that I became sort of you sympathize with what was happening to me, basically.
Yeah, and that every voice matters. Your voice matters too, right? Right. Yeah, so just if you that part.
So yeah, that my voice matters, right?
Yeah, and I had the same experience coming to XR San Francisco. I felt like people didn't want to hear what I had to say. It was like, kind of suspicion. I had created this XR Empathy Circle work group, and nobody bothered asking, you know, how did this come about? Where was it from? What was up with this? It was like, you can't do that. The work group, it's got to be an affinity group. And you couldn't even talk to people. It was like, it was just like, yeah, it was just really, I was quite surprised at the lack of listening.
So yeah, so you had a lot of blowback for the working group you were organizing for, and you felt like that wasn't really appropriate to the movement.
Yeah, it was like totally 180 degrees different from my experience with XR in the UK. It was like, oh, cool. What are you working on? How can we incorporate this into what we're doing here? And, you know, let's hear about what you're up to. It was like a whole different attitude. It was a listening attitude. And it was like really great. It's been great to kind of work with them.
So you've had some great experiences with XR UK. They've been very supportive of your idea of the empathy circle. They've managed to incorporate it and to work it into their culture.
Yeah, and so I was actually to the point where I thought we with our empathy tent. We have this tent. It's, you know, it says empathy tent. I've been setting it up here in this general area ever since Occupy Wall Street. So I have a long history with, you know, bringing this to different conflicts and rallies and all this kind of stuff. And, you know, we set up our own, you know, several times, just set up in Berkeley, UC Berkeley with it, had XR Empathy Cafe. And so I started just doing stuff on my own. And I was like ready to start a separate chapter, say XR Berkeley, you know, because it was like horrible working with XR San Francisco.
So you felt like you had a pretty good standing in the community, and that you've been out there with your empathy circles, and
the empathy tent. It's a physical tent that's been there ever since Occupy Wall Street in Berkeley.
So yeah, you've have real credentials bringing your tent to Occupy Wall Street and having it on the Berkeley campus, and but it was not being welcomed in the XR San Francisco group, presumably because it wasn't indigenous led.
Yeah, it was like there's kind of like this heavy, you know, kind of controlling kind of energy where it just seemed to not be about let's have a dialogue. Even to have these dialogues here with XR San Francisco, it's like pulling teeth. I'm so glad, you know, you're here, Kara. So yeah, so it's that's been my experience, and even in, you know, I mean, Callista has seen those things. It's like XR America, they're white supremacists, they're lynching people, stuff like that. I mean, it's like totally over the top.
So you've noticed that it's not just divisiveness, but there seems to be a lack of tolerance, kind of, where they're running up against that line that I think that I was talking about as well. That there's some kind of line, and then for some reason there's a line drawn, and then that's it. Everything blows up.
And it's only recently that Ahan, a new member, he created a sort of a welcoming committee. It's been amazing. It was like, you know, willing to listen, have, you know, check in. So it's kind of brought me back into the chapter. And I got to really thank him and, you know, Jade and some others for sort of a more welcoming attitude. And so I feel like I'm starting to build a relationship. So I'm grateful for that.
So you feel like things are starting to look up. You're meeting some allies for your empathy circle, and you're starting to build
relationships. Yeah, and listen. There seems to be more mutual listening. Yeah.
Relationships.
Yeah. So that was my 5 minutes. I feel heard. Thanks.
Okay. All right. Callista, I'm gonna talk to you.
Awesome.
Gosh, I don't even know what to talk about. I feel so heard already. I feel like I really wanted to talk about climate and ecological justice, and I got to talk about that. I guess, I don't know, some of the other major issues that I think possibly comes up, maybe you haven't thought about this, but the fourth demand of, I don't know. I don't know what to say, really.
Okay, so I'm hearing that you came into this meeting and you had some points you wanted to talk about. You felt like you've already kind of touched on them a bit. And there was one other thing that you were maybe wanting to talk about.
Yeah, so I guess yeah, I don't really know. I mean, I think what Cara brought up, I mean, she made some good points. I think there is a risk with neoliberalism in the United States specifically, and the fourth demand, that there are exploits that people could use with the fourth demand and neoliberalism to sort of shut down XR groups or create or incite divisiveness. So I'd be concerned about that, I guess.
Okay, so I'm hearing that you're recognizing some validity in what Cara was talking about, and also voicing your own concerns about like neoliberalism in the United States and the subsequent divisiveness of that within also XR chapters.
Yeah. So I guess the major problem with neoliberalism right now is that it's not just about, it's almost a mischaracterization to say that there's those on the left that say race is everything and those on the left that say, you know, class is everything. I don't know if that was, or, you know, we should be colorblind. I don't think that's really what people are saying. I don't think anybody that is advocating for class-based language is really saying that race doesn't matter. They're saying that that class should be considered equally. That those are the kind of things, and to put too much emphasis on race completely blows all validity for the entire conversation, because you end up losing class just by default.
So I'm hearing that you are thinking that the kind of divides between the left are probably a little more, not just like, oh, colorblind or not colorblind, but really the validity of class in the entire struggle, and the inclusion of class with an equal weight as race in our shared struggle for liberation.
Right. I think, and I guess this is one of my like cheat sheets that I've discovered, really, because we're talking about growing this movement. I mean, and implementing these demands. It seems so simple to me that, you know, if we could, you know, stick to these principles, which essentially grow the movement, and stick to demands, whether it be animal rebellion demands, which I'm a vegan, I'm also an animal rebellion guy, or be the fourth demand US version or the fourth demand American version. Stick to having some demands that are relatively simple and really, really focus on these principles. We could grow the movement and put pressure on the government.
So I'm hearing that whether like in the differences of these principles, as long as, you know, every organization sticks to those principles and really uses those, we can effectively grow our movements all together and kind of use them and work together to put pressure on the government from all our different organizations with similar values.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of them, I think, specifically talk about, you know, studying social movements and things like that. So I think studying a social movement is probably, you know, one of the most important things we can do. And I think if we all did that a little bit more and a little less, you know, nitpicking on each other, I think if we all just studied our social movements and participated, I think it'd be better.
So you're kind of advocating for people to really understand where past groups have been, and to really focus on applying that knowledge to the future instead of just getting bogged down by all the tiny little identity politics.
All right, I'm heard.
Okay, and I will talk to Edwin.
Listening.
Okay. I might need to give a second, collect my thoughts. Okay, so I've just really enjoyed, first of all, just hearing and being in an empathy circle and listening to how this goes. And I've been kind of just figuring out and feeling the process. And I'm really enjoying it because I really do feel like I heard everyone here today, and I feel like everyone themselves has maybe felt heard, from what I understand. And I'm already just excited about this first little step. And I'm already thinking about the future and larger applications.
So I'm hearing a real appreciation for the process that you've taken part in, that you've felt heard. You actually are noticing or sensing that everyone has felt heard. And this is like the first step, and you're already thinking of bigger kind of next steps to take next.
Yeah, I think these are issues that won't necessarily be resolved in one meeting, and they won't necessarily be resolved by one decision from bridging XR US and XR America. I think the bigger question of race into American resistance movements against like the current hierarchical structures that we have will always be a fundamental question that will affect a lot of people very differently. And I think it is always important to recognize that it will always affect a lot of people very differently.
So just in this one meeting, we're not going to solve all the problems, and just realize that these are ongoing and different people are affected differently, and just have some awareness that that's the case.
Yeah, because, you know, I really enjoyed the listening and understanding from fellow rebels. And I'm also kind of curious as to what it might be like to talk to people who are completely opposed to even any sort of resistance in general, and who aren't even close to being near our side, and kind of trying to conquer the idea that maybe that there are sides, and that maybe we can all work for a better future together. But yeah, just thinking about the possible resistance that we might encounter and how this can serve as a bridge or a tool to reach out to some of those people.
So you're thinking of how what we're doing here, this empathic listening or the empathy circle, could be a tool to reach out to people who you might have differences with, and it might be a tool to sort of bridge those divides with them.
Yeah, because I am kind of seeing that this will probably become a tricky topic no matter what for people left, center, and right, because everyone has kind of already found themselves being like just turned into one direction or the other as you grow up. And so people I don't think necessarily have like a very deep like loyalty to these identities, but they've just been shaped by them. So it kind of becomes hard to separate yourself from them and kind of see other perspectives. But when people agree to come together and at least listen and validate other perspectives, I think it's the number one step in the right direction.
Okay, so people have grown up, they've kind of gone in different directions, left, right, center, along the different spectrum, and they just sort of ended up there, and they haven't maybe thought of it so much about kind of how they got there. But it's important to have these dialogues with each other to kind of open up the perspectives, and maybe that can create some shifts.
Yeah, I feel heard. Thank you.
Okay, great. Cara, I speak to you, and you're muted.
Okay, I'm here.
Okay, so I have a little bit of a different take on the, the racism class issues. And for me, the underlying issue is empathy. So I even wear it on my shirt. And for me, the issues like race, class are different tools of judgment. It's like how we judge each other. And they have sort of a common root for me in judgment, and judgment blocks empathy. So I'll start with that.
Okay, so you're like you're talking about, it's kind of like there's like an underlying fundamental philosophical thing to issues of race and class. It's like even like before that, which is
Mhm.
in categorizing and judging people. And it's in that act in itself that is like that gets in the way of empathy.
Yeah, and people judge all over within ethnic groups, within class groups. They judge each other. They even judge each other maybe harsher, across these differences. But judgment is sort of rampant throughout society. So I see that as the sort of a core issue. And what we're doing here, we might have differences. We might even be judging each other. But before we're judging each other, we're listening to each other. And it's like, yeah, so, and I think that's like the first step. It's like creating empathy between each other and different groups.
So what I'm hearing from you is that it's like it's more about like creating the space for empathy to be possible initially, to like that's like the first step in getting over and in overcoming judgments, and that is in hearing each other.
Yeah, and if you want to overcome racism, telling people they're judging people about being judgmental, that doesn't work very good. All it's doing, it's like Gandhi, it's, or whoever, Martin Luther King, it's like the darkness doesn't drive out darkness. The judgment doesn't drive out judgment. It's the light, which I see as empathy. So when we empathize with each other, we're actually, it's transformative, and I see it as the only way really forward.
Yeah. So, what I'm hearing from you is like being judgmental about somebody else's judgmentality is just never, it's just punishing. It's not like helpful. It's not like going to move us forward. It doesn't bring about the empathy we need to understand each other.
And I see that like what I'm seeing in the news, it's like everybody's saying, there's all these problems, just everybody's suffering, everyone's in pain, they're in tears. But there seems to be no way out. It's like, we've done this, it's going on. It's like sort of this hopelessness. But I do think that if we can just bring people together, from all sides in empathic dialogue, that is the way forward. And I would love to see XR have that, and it's happening, that it becomes integrated into XR. So that the meetings actually start with empathy circles between the participants. Take time for the participants all to do what we're doing right here.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is like integrating it even into like the process of how we organize enables us to like work in the kind of, anti-judgmental behaviors into the work we do in itself, just by listening to each other in the first place.
Yeah. So the means are the end. So we need empathic means to get an empathic society.
An empathic society.
So we have to sort of live it, and there's no other way than just sitting down, trying to talk to each other, at least, especially within XR, right? I mean, let alone if we can't even, dialogue within XR, how are we going to talk with people on the outside?
Yeah. I definitely hear you. I hear like this, that dialogue is really critical, and that we have to be able to sit down and have dialogue amongst each other. And that also, like, to become the change we want to see, we also have to live that change in the way that we currently operate.
Exactly. And I'm willing to do empathic direct action, which is if we're going to go in front of a bank or in front of the government offices, that one of the demands is to have an empathy circle with the CEO or the the city council or the governor or the Congress. We say, we demand an empathy circle with you, and to talk across, because we're going to have to bridge those political divides too, to address the problems that are here.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is that you actually see like broad applications of this, and even into action. It's not just a passive thing that we're doing on the sidelines, but that it's also a way for us to actively engage the politics and also our communities and the people who are opposing us in order to move forward.
Feel very well heard. Thank you.
Okay. I will talk to Will.
All right.
I guess I'm just going to talk about like my personal experience last year with something, and I think somebody else wrote a message into XR about this, and they refer to it as othering, and I think this is what we do to each other. It's not just a question of like race, class, and privilege, which causes us to fall into certain categories, but when we come into an activist space, we often other each other. I think that you just pause there.
So what you're recognizing, and it has kind of happened last year, is that we other each other. And I'm not familiar with that term, but
Okay, yeah, that's good. That term is it means exactly what it sounds like. So like, I am me and you are other than me. You're different. You're this other group. Like, so it's like the judgment that Edwin was talking about, the wokeness, right? That's a way of so like we're all in activist space. We all are here. We think we have like good intentions. We've come together for the same purpose. Some of us are white, some of us are brown, some have experience, some don't. Some use the right keywords, some don't know them yet. Some are male, some are female. And very quickly, it can happen that these groups then sort of sort into like the woker category and others. And we start saying, you're woke, you're not. And that's what othering means, right? You're suddenly taking someone from who was common with you and saying they're different from you.
so to clarify, othering is basically creating this situation where they are other and you are this. And so there might be certain cliques or whatever within the group or the community, but what's really happening are divisions.
Yeah, and you know what? Those are like, they're not divisions that are like can easily be bridged, right? They're like, you're either with us or you're against us. You're either woke or you're not. You're either in this position of the inverse hierarchy, or you're a white male and you should shut the fuck up.
So so this othering, it's not a permanent situation. These can be bridged. However, you either are on one side or the other.
I guess what I'm saying is like, that's not quite it. More like, when you do this to somebody else, you're kind of setting up an opposition with them, where you're saying like, you're either with me or you're against me, right? So you're either with XR US or you're with XR America. You're woke on the fourth demand or you're not. You get it or you don't. Like, you know what I mean? There's these extremes. And what I experienced last year was like a lot of that. And I myself had a lot of trouble with it. Being a white activist and getting finding that was a tough place to start from, not knowing where to start, and then encountering these moments where I was being forced to like either like say or do the right thing to be considered part of the woke group, or like saying something that immediately othered me, right? With no ground for dialogue in between, like no empathy, like a really toxic dialogue environment. So I can pause there.
You had this really toxic environment that you sort of went through last year, where there was a lot of othering taking place, and it was very hard to navigate in this space. Maybe even more othering than you're used to.
Totally. I don't normally occupy activism. So like I don't normally get this much. And I'm like a pretty nice, enlightened person. And I had no idea I was gonna be called a white supremacist for asking a question that I really didn't think merited that kind of response. And it didn't actually merit that kind of response.
So you were actually identified or named as a white supremacist in your circle?
In a chat, not by someone who doesn't know me. for asking a question that I think wasn't racist, but like that sometimes the tension in the room could get so high, and I wasn't being responded to with empathy, and I don't always know. I make a lot of mistakes. Like, I don't know. I'm gonna have to ask questions. Like, I'm probably gonna say something wrong or stupid to somebody that hurts their feelings, like, without meaning it, because there are ways that I've been programmed that, like, I don't even understand, and I'm beginning to learn more about. But there are biases that all of us have, right? And when we're in a sensitive space trying to learn about these things, it's hard to get slapped, right? When you didn't even realize you were treading on somebody's toes.
So you are human, and you make mistakes, but your lived experience sometimes makes it more difficult to find these common grounds. But I don't know.
Well, I guess just to conclude, like, I definitely find that this empathic space that we're occupying now is a very good example of the opposite of that, which is we take the time to pause, and we take the time to attempt to understand what the other person meant before we shout them down, before we respond. So, like, I wanted to, say that I'm finding that a very positive experience in contrast.
You like the empathy circle in the format because it allows people to pause and not rush to judgments against each other and to understand each other.
Yeah, but that ultimately, like, this is hard, right? Talking about race, and I personally have found it really hard, and it hasn't always been. I have not always been treated with empathy.
Because you've not always been treated with empathy, you find this to be difficult at times.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. I feel heard.
All right. I am going to go to Edwin.
Listening.
All right. All right. So I guess this is a tricky situation that I'm in currently. And I guess maybe this doesn't have a whole lot to do with everything, but maybe it does. We'll find out through the exploration of my thought process here. So basically, I'm trying to organize an action for June 12th, because on June 12th, our city wants to reopen from COVID-19. They're beginning phase 1 and phase 2. They're not really clear about whether it's phase 1 or phase 2. That's going to be June 12th, but they are clear about that date. And so I'm trying to organize an action around that date.
Okay, so you want to, there's a topic you want to talk about. You're not sure if it's sort of switching topics, but perhaps it's not. And it's that the city is sort of going into a stage of opening, and you're planning an action.
So yeah, so I'm very dedicated to this action that I'm planning, and I'm finding it extremely frustrating that not that there's Black Lives Matter protests right now happening, because these are honestly important protests to happen, and not that, but that there's a really, really, really big divide happening where people seem to be, I don't know what you call it, like they're either saying like everything that happens is great or not, whereas I think there are mistakes happening, I think, that we can learn from in the current protests that are happening that could blow back and affect my own protest. In fact, I don't even know if I'm going to have a protest because of what's going on with the Black Lives Matter protests that are possibly being co-opted. I don't know what's happening.
Mm-hmm. So you're talking about the current demonstrations that are happening, and that people are, taking a position of, hey, this is really great, or it's not. So it's sort of two different camps that you're seeing, and you're just
Yeah.
oh.
Yeah, what I'm seeing is like, okay, for one thing, it's like property damage. People are, putting on masks and destroying property and whatnot. And, one thing that they do a lot is ACAB, right? All cops are bastards. And as Extinction Rebellion, we would never do that, right? And so I'm left thinking like, okay, do I judge? I can't judge this, right? But at the same time, that's not Black Lives Matter. I'm pretty sure this is supposed to be a movement in solidarity with Black Lives Matter. And it seems like people who are against police are co-opting the Black Lives Matter, which isn't against police. They're against the way the police are creating violence against people.
So you're seeing a group that's sort of trying to, you feel, co-opt the movement, that it's kind of becoming like all police are bad or very antagonistic, and it sounds like you're kind of concerned about how it's going to affect what your action is, and you're thinking maybe not even holding your action, because it sounds like you're unclear of sort of how to navigate that space.
Right. I don't know what's happening. I feel like people are endangering themselves during the pandemic already, and then I think there's further endangerment and recklessness that's being encouraged by this co-option. And I feel like I can't really talk about it because I'm not a person of color, and I'm not engaging in the protests. I'm waiting right now because I don't feel like it's a safe time.
So this issue, you feel like you can't really talk to people about it because you're not part of Black Lives Matter, so don't have really a say in that, plus kind of unclear of really what's happening. You're not clear on.
Yeah, I think as an activist, I think I'm finding this to be very disempowering, and feel like maybe I should cancel my thing, this protest that I'm working on, and I just feel like nobody's talking about it. Nobody's saying anything.
So the feeling you get from this is sort of a disempowered feeling, and people aren't really talking about how maybe the movement is being co-opted, and a very antagonistic to the police kind of aspect is happening too. That was 5 minutes. If you want to wrap up, or.
Yeah, I don't know if that really has anything to do with what we're talking about. I mean, obviously we've got another intersection there with, people of color and our Extinction Rebellion movement, which is, it's what it is.
Yeah, it's like you're not sure if it's relevant to the dialogue we've been having here about the XR, but it does seem to be some kind of an intersection. So it's not like you're just kind of thinking about it and trying to sort of explore, understand, get some deeper understanding. So you feel heard?
I feel heard.
Okay. Then Callista, I could speak to you. Yeah, I was really excited to hear the support from everyone here about empathy, because I feel like I'm a bit of an evangelist, empathy evangelist. So it's great to hear some support, just like it was great to hear your support within the, the XR San Francisco meeting.
So yeah, you're finally kind of feeling heard by people who share similar empathetic values, and it feels really good to finally have some supporters of that where you haven't before.
Yeah, well, we have a lot. There's a lot all over the world, so there's been a huge amount of support. In terms of these empathy circles, we're doing trainings, but it's more like in Europe and Australia than in the United States. So I really want to get this going more here. And it's weird since I'm here in San Francisco. Yeah,
So abroad has kind of embraced the culture of empathetic listening a little bit more readily than the United States has, even surprisingly in San Francisco, or maybe surprisingly Tucson.
Yeah, and yeah, I'm not quite sure what to, just thinking of what's happening on the streets right now. I haven't been out because I have the same concern, about social distancing. So I had thought of taking the empathy tent and just setting up in, you know, the BART Plaza in Berkeley. I've set up there a lot of times just to have a presence. So sometimes just having an empathy tent out there in the middle of things just brings that kind of presence there. So anyway, I'm not really sure what to do either. So kind of identifying a bit with Will. You still there, or oops? Oop. Oh, it looks like you probably didn't hear me. You got.
No, I just got booted out and then I'm back.
Oh, great! Glad you.
I'm back.
Yeah. So basically, I was just saying I sort of identified with Will, just not quite knowing what, you know, how to deal with the current demonstrations that are happening. Thought of taking the empathy tent out, but.
So you're kind of wondering where maybe you can fit in the larger picture of all of these resistance movements, but feeling a little lost as maybe they're not exactly organized by XR, and just kind of wondering even where our principles maybe.
Yeah, I mean, for me, exactly. Yeah, I would try to get empathy circles going between the police and, you know, Black Lives Matter, like in Berkeley. Yeah, would the police or the city council be willing to take part in empathy circles? So I had thought of, you know, could pop up the empathy tent in front of the police station or something like that. And so, yeah, I'm certainly not in the camp of demonizing, you know, any of the sides, even though I get mad at different sides. But it's like, you know, it is for me about getting dialogue going. And I think that's really the solution too, is it's the dialogue with the community and the police in empathy. I would love to see, you know, empathy circles with a police officer, you know, citizens, and have those recorded and posted.
So it sounds like even a potential theory for this particular cause is that you could have empathy circles between both sides, which would be the police and Black Lives Matter, or even just people of color in general, specifically Black people. And then also you're kind of just interested in seeing this kind of go on a broader scale, just in general, because, you know, people need to listen to one another for things to go forward in a more positive direction.
And you and I are going to create the XR empathy group, so XR San Francisco. So we need to talk about that too. Like, how do we kind of bring this into XR San Francisco? So looking forward to that.
Yeah, I'm also looking forward to that, and I'm glad to hear you're really excited about that too, because yeah, this is, I think, a step in the right direction, and I'm glad we're both trying to move the chapter there.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you took part in this, because I think that everybody's voice sort of matters. Like, you've brought a really beautiful perspective as someone that's new to the movement, things that, you know, we wouldn't have heard. So I think it was important and great that you took part.
Thank you. I'm hearing that, you know, you welcome everyone to these circles, whether or not they've had like a lot of experience, or whether, you know, they're part of the same side, or just everyone's voice matters and should be heard.
Yeah, and I feel heard. And I think you have one last turn, and then we're at the 2-hour mark. Probably would need to close.
Perfect. Edwin, I'll talk back to you.
Oh, okay. Listening.
So wow, there's a lot of things I have to like say and touch upon. Specifically, I know we got into the Black Lives Matter movement, into that territory, and you know, I have a lot of thoughts, particularly just as like someone who's like really grown up, like just watching the police brutality in this country, and kind of seeing what it does to people of color. And I know many people who are very much on the all cops are bastards side, and people who've kind of talked about just the origins of the police force as slave catchers, and like the origins of police in this country and what they've done, and just their role in America in general. So I definitely see why people are so against the police, first of all. Also, I'll stop there.
Okay, so really there's a lot going on, a lot of ideas that are coming up. And the one is you have a real understanding for people who are critical of the police, and kind of from a whole history of being slave catchers, etc. So you have some real understanding for that.
Yeah, and also how the police have become more and more militarized since the 70s, and it's become a little more graphic, the violence in which they're legally allowed to enact. But at the same time, I also recognize the people who really believe in the system of America and really believe in those principles and values and want to uphold them as best they can, and really are trying to do the right thing, even if it does lead to, more arrests of people of color than of white people. So I want to really understand that people go into it not with ill intent, and they're not intending to go in and cause structural damage to communities, but also kind of recognizing intent does not equal impact sometimes. I'm trying to, like you said, I think empathy circles could kind of start bridging that conversation, that divide, and having people kind of recognize that what their impact is, and what their intentions are, and going forward in the future, maybe what could we revise about the system that could benefit people a little better, whether it's a radical change or even small structural changes.
So you're seeing that people don't go in with, they go in with a positive intent, but they don't see what impact they have on other people. And that you do see kind of that there can be some changes that could happen or that could be taken, some small changes, and you're kind of optimistic about taking those changes, making those changes or advocating for them.
Yeah, and I think the only way those changes will come about is if, the people in charge are more willing to listen. And I think that will come through with hearing the voices of people who have continually been forced to be silent. And although protesting is an effective way to get people's attention, I think that's definitely one of the best ways to get people's attention. But I think also one of the best ways for people to really understand is through these empathy circles and to actually listen. This understanding really comes from listening, but you have to get their attention first, is the unfortunate part. Yeah.
So you feel that the people in power may not be listening, and that you have to get their attention because they haven't been listening to the people who have been marginalized. And so these actions are a way of getting people's attention to be willing to have a dialogue. And maybe once that dialogue starts happening, these empathic dialogues would be a step forward.
Yeah, and basing off of what Will was talking about of social movements in the past, I think social movements have kind of stopped after the attention, and there wasn't a real way to bridge that understanding to go forward. And attention is integral, so people don't just bury their necks in the sand. But I think we all need to be ready, everyone from every corner of America, the globe, whatever, it needs to personally be ready to kind of meet each other halfway and have these uncomfortable but important dialogues together, because just kind of raising attention and then going back to burying your head in the sand just causes a lot of underlying tension instead of addressing it and then moving forward from it.
Yeah, so what you've seen from the past is people get the attention, but then it doesn't go anywhere. And what we're doing here is having these dialogues is the way. So the next step, once the attention is there, let's have these dialogues to really talk about how to change things together. And it's like a necessary step that hasn't happened.
Thank you, I feel heard.
Okay, cool. All right, well, that was almost 2 hours, so thanks for hanging in there. Usually the empathy circles go for 2 hours, and if it's a big conflict one, sometimes we go for 3 or 4 hours because it takes that time to work through the big issues. And so very grateful for everyone taking part. Maybe a final comment from each person before we close. Will, you want to just...
Sure. It was great meeting everybody. I'm excited for Callista to get in there with the empathy circles. I tried making one myself at school in our thing. We tried doing an empathy circle. We watched the video, and it's quite an experience. So good on you for getting involved in that. I think it's going to be a great experience. And Cara, it was great meeting you and hearing about your experience. Totally amazing. You're getting out there over the weekend. I don't have the guts to do it yet for that particular protest, but good job on you. Edwin, it was great meeting you. I've seen your work online a lot, and I all the admiration in the world for what you're trying to do.
Thanks. Cara, would you like to final closing?
Yeah, I suppose that these are terrible times that we live in. We're navigating forward together, and there must be a way forward. And that way forward is dialogue. And I'm very happy to see that these issues between XR US, XR America are structural dialogues that were happening around regional formations and all of that stuff. But particularly these kinds of conversations where we can have a very healthy dialogue and hearing each other, respecting each other, and taking the time to not shout each other down, I find that this format seems to preclude judgment and prevent those judgments from dominating the space, which is a major problem that I just, because it's fraught ground it's a fraught world, and it's fraught ground we have to navigate going forward. But just thank you, Edwin. And I also heard you when you said that you felt that you got repeatedly pushed off last year by people. I am very sorry to hear about that experience, and I think we went through some growing pains around August, September, and October, maybe even before that, where we had too many protests to please, too many things on our plate, and not enough structural organization to be able to welcome people and hear everybody who was coming to us, and we lost some people in that process. And that's just unfortunate. I'm really sorry that you had that experience, and I'm also really happy to hear that Han is reaching out to you now. He's wonderful. I've worked with him. He's like, I love Han. He's amazing, and I'm really appreciative that this has entered the XR space for San Francisco.
Hey, thank you, Callista.
Yeah, this was a great first empathy circle. I feel like I learned a lot just about the whole process. Thank you both, Cara and Will, for sharing and allowing yourself to be vulnerable and really opening up in this space. And to Will, I'd say that I think, just even, I know you said you don't have guts, but even just coming here today to really talk to people who you're not sure will even accept you does take guts. And I think, this was a really good step. And I think, maybe we can all be out there on the street soon, hopefully when this pandemic blows over. But, I just thank you everyone for participating, and I loved it.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. And
Thank you.
The conversation will continue. So there'll be others of these, and invite your friends, and let's keep the dialogue going. So, thanks.
All right, great.
Thanks
everyone. Good night.
Bye.
Thank you.